At 63, Chief Bernard was one of Nigeria's wealthiest and most accomplished men, a name that silenced boardrooms with reverence. His fortune, built through Orion West Holdings, stretched across the dazzling beachfront properties of Lekki, a testament to his relentless vision. He had endured economic crises, political turmoil, and outwitted competitors half his age with a rare blend of iron resolve and dignified poise. Yet, when people spoke of his greatest treasure, it wasn't his immense wealth or sprawling empire. It was Larry, his only son, the living legacy he cherished with boundless pride. Larry grew up surrounded by riches, yet wealth never shaped his heart. Raised in a world of private planes and prestigious schools, he remained humble, always greeting the driver with a respectful nod and calling the cook Ma with sincere kindness. Now, as a final-year medical student in the UK, he carried a calm confidence, eyes that saw deeply, and a presence so striking that even Chief Bernard sometimes paused, marveling. Has my boy already eclipsed me? But as the day of Larry's return to Nigeria drew closer, a quiet unease settled over Bernard, heavy like the dark clouds before a Lagos rain. It wasn't doubt in his son's integrity or fear that he'd falter in his ambitions. No, Bernard's worry ran deeper. For men like Larry, the greatest threat wasn't failure. It was falling into a love that sparkled with deceit. Too often, he'd seen brilliant young men ruined by marriages built on shallow promises, dazzling at first, but crumbling when the fortune faded. A woman who chased a man's name, not his essence, could shatter a legacy forged over a lifetime. Within the bustling halls of Orion West Holdings, where hundreds worked under his command, two women had quietly piqued Bernard's attention. Unravel the mystery with Baobab African Tales. Subscribe and chase the truth. That morning, Chief Bernard sat behind his desk, fingers tapping softly on the polished wood. The sunlight poured through the tall windows of his office. He had already made his choice. Now, it was time to begin. He pressed the intercom. "Tell Sandra to come in." A few minutes later, there was a soft knock. "Come in," he said. Sandra stepped inside, modest blouse, neat skirt, her posture straight but gentle. "Good morning, sir," she said, folding her hands politely in front of her. "Morning, Sandra. Please, sit." She nodded and sat down, quietly. Chief Bernard studied her for a moment, calm, composed, no hint of pride. Then he spoke, voice even and warm. "My son, Larry, is about to graduate from medical school in the UK. He'll be returning soon." Sandra's eyes widened slightly. "That's wonderful, sir. Congratulations." Bernard smiled faintly. "Thank you, my dear. I've been watching you in this company. You're respectful, educated, kind, hard-working." She looked down at her lap, almost shy, her hands gently folded. "I believe you could make a good wife," Bernard continued. "Not because you need to try, but because of who you already are." Sandra blinked, then looked up, soft, sincere. "Sir, I don't know what to say. Thank you for your kindness. I'm honored. But I don't want to be seen as someone trying to impress. I just want to be myself." Bernard nodded, pleased. "And that's all I ask of you. Be yourself. If Larry sees your heart, the rest will follow." Sandra gave a small, genuine smile. "Yes, sir. Thank you." "You may go," he said gently. She stood, bowed her head lightly in respect, and walked out without glancing back. 5 minutes later, the second knock came, sharp, rhythmic. "Come in." Jessica entered with confident steps, smile radiant. "Good morning, Chief," she said with a brightness that filled the room. "Jessica, please, take a seat." She crossed her legs neatly and leaned slightly forward, hands on the table. "Ready?" My son, Larry, is returning from medical school abroad, Bernard said directly. I've had my eyes on you for a while. You're smart, elegant, you carry yourself well. Jessica nodded, her eyes glowing. Thank you, sir. I believe you might be a good match for him, he added. Jessica's smile didn't change, but something in her posture shifted, sharpened. I appreciate that, Chief. I promise to always carry myself with grace. And if I ever get the chance, I'll make you proud. Bernard raised an eyebrow slightly. That's good to hear. I've always believed that real class comes from character, Jessica added quickly, then stood. Thank you again, sir. Truly. You may go, Bernard said. She left the room with the same grace she entered, shoulders high, chin up. But this time, her thoughts were racing. She was already imagining a future. And in that future, her last name was Bernard. Chief Bernard sat alone in his office for a long time. The meetings were done, the calls had stopped, but his mind was still full. He opened his phone and dialed. Across the sea, in a university in London, Larry picked up. Dad, he said, smiling, it's been a while. My son? Bernard replied, his voice soft. I wanted to check on you. How are your finals going? Almost done. I'll be heading home soon. There was a pause. Then Bernard cleared his throat. Larry, you remember the promise you made? To marry after graduation? Larry laughed lightly. I didn't forget, but marriage isn't an exam, Dad. It's not something you rush. True, Bernard said. But I want you to consider something. I've seen two women in my company, Sandra and Jessica. They're both educated, respectful, beautiful. I've spoken to them already. Larry looked up, a sly grin curling on his lips. Are you trying to choose me a wife, Dad? Like picking a stock to invest in? No. I just want you to see who's real, Bernard said. Just helping. I told them nothing would be forced. Larry was quiet for a moment, his voice calm, but his heart racing. Thank you, Dad. The arrivals hall at Murtala Mohammed Airport buzzed with movement, luggage wheels, voices, reunions. But Chief Bernard stood still, dressed simply in white, eyes fixed on the gate. And then he saw him. Larry stepped through the crowd, tall and calm, a black duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Their eyes met. Bernard didn't say a word. He simply opened his arms. My son, he said with pride. Larry walked into the hug. Tight, warm, long overdue. It's good to see you, Dad, he said. Welcome home, Bernard replied. For real this time? That night, over a quiet dinner at the family home, they spoke like old friends. Bernard asked about London. Larry asked about the company. Laughter came easily. But when dessert was cleared and the staff had left the room, the tone shifted. I haven't forgotten what you said, Bernard began. About the two women, Larry asked. Yes, I spoke with them both, separately. I didn't say much, just asked them to be themselves when you arrive. One day soon, he told his son, I want you to meet them. Larry nodded, then leaned back in his chair. Dad, what if I don't arrive as myself? Bernard looked up slowly. What do you mean? Let me come in through the back. No driver, no announcement. Let me be someone nobody notices. A security guard, maybe. I want to see who's real. Bernard was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. You're definitely my son. If you're bold enough to wear that disguise, he said, voice low, then wear it well. But promise me one thing. Larry waited. Don't break character, Bernard said, even if it breaks your heart. The next morning, the transformation began. Larry traded in his designer suits for a faded blue uniform that sagged at the shoulders and itched at the collar. His shoes, once leather and polished, were now rubber-soled and scuffed. Gone was the watch that marked his time in London, replaced by a plastic one with no brand, no shine. He moved quietly into the staff quarters behind the company compound. The air inside was thick, equal parts dust, diesel, and dried sweat. Paint peeled from the walls like tired skin. Each morning before dawn, he took his place at the front gate, cap pulled low, back straight, eyes open. Most people passed him without a word. Some didn't even register his presence, like he was part of the scenery, like the wall or the gate he guarded. But Sandra saw him. On that first day, she paused in front of him, not out of obligation, but intention. "Morning, Olga Security," she said, offering a bottle of cold water wrapped in tissue. Her voice was soft, but her eyes met his like they had nothing to hide. Then she walked inside, without waiting for thanks. Jessica arrived minutes later, heels tapping the pavement like a metronome, perfume floating 2 steps ahead of her. She didn't break stride, didn't glance his way, just passed like wind through a glass door, clean, cold, and distant. By the end of the first week, Larry had begun to write, not about people, but about patterns. He kept a small notebook tucked in his pocket, scribbling during lunch breaks or quiet evenings under the flickering compound light. He didn't need names. The truth revealed itself in gestures. He wrote one line that stayed with him for days. "People speak loudest when they think you're invisible." He had written that after overhearing Jessica at reception laughing too loudly as she said, "Honestly, half of these low-level staff are just decorative. What value do they even bring?" Meanwhile, Sandra remained consistent. She always greeted him. On hot days, she left him a chilled sachet of water beside his chair. Once, when he coughed during a rainy shift, she brought him ginger tea in a flask without saying a word. Larry watched her from the shade, wondering how someone could carry so much grace without needing to be seen. The head guard, who slapped Larry's shoulder and chuckled, "My guy, don't waste your smile on that Jessica babe. She only sees you if you come with a Benz and a Rolex." Larry smiled politely, but didn't respond. And so the man at the gate, quiet, watchful, invisible to most, kept standing there, not just guarding the compound, but watching the hearts that entered it. By the third week, the novelty of the new security man had worn off. Larry had blended into the rhythm of the place. He had become part of the background, the silent gatekeeper, always nodding, always watching. And that's when the masks began to fall. Jessica, who had once floated through the office like a celebrity at a press event, no longer made any effort to be subtle. She didn't just ignore the support staff, she belittled them. One afternoon, as she adjusted her sunglasses in the reception mirror, Larry overheard her snapping at a janitor. "Move out of my way, please. This is not your runway," she scoffed, not even glancing back. In the staff cafeteria, her words grew sharper. She sat with her friends like royalty, legs crossed, voice louder than necessary. She called one intern a corporate mosquito for delivering her files late. Another day, she smirked and said, "Soon I'll be sitting at the top. And when that happens, I hope they redecorate, because this place doesn't match my vibe." Laughter followed, but it wasn't genuine. Sandra, meanwhile, remained a quiet presence. She was never flashy, never loud, but her calmness spoke volumes. During lunch breaks, when Jessica threw passive-aggressive jabs, comments like, "Some people think being quiet makes them deep," Sandra never flinched. She simply smiled, excused herself, and offered her seat to an intern who looked too nervous to sit. Larry saw it all. He stood at his post and took mental notes. Jessica's confidence seemed rehearsed. Sandra's humility? That was real. She was kind even when no one was watching, polite to security guards, respectful to cleaners. And yet, Larry still wasn't sure. He knew people could perform goodness the same way they performed charm. He needed time. He needed truth to reveal itself slowly, like light creeping in through old curtains. One afternoon, the head guard, a round man with a belly that jiggled when he laughed, nudged Larry with his elbow. He pointed toward Jessica, who was striding across the compound in a red pencil skirt and heels that clicked like a countdown. "You see that one?" the guard chuckled. "She wouldn't even greet you if you were on fire. You're not even a shadow to her." Larry didn't reply, but the words stayed with him. He remembered once holding the door open for Jessica during a rainstorm. She walked through without a word, umbrella in hand, pausing only to check her reflection in her phone camera. By contrast, he remembered Sandra borrowing a mop from the cleaner when someone spilled tea near reception. She didn't call for help. She acted. Quietly. And when the cleaner returned, she said, "Thank you for letting me use it. You saved me." It was that simple. Larry wrote in his notebook that night, "Charm can fill a room, but character fills silence." He was beginning to see the difference. Not between two women, but between performance and presence. And in a world full of people trying to be seen, Sandra had mastered something rarer. He saw, and maybe, just maybe, it happened on a quiet Tuesday, and even the birds seemed too tired to sing. Larry had been pacing the small path between the gatehouse and the side garden for over 20 minutes, rehearsing in his mind what he wanted to say. His palms were sweating, not from the weather, but from nerves, because no amount of disguise could hide what he was beginning to feel. He had fallen for her, not in the dramatic, fireworks kind of way, but slowly, deeply. When Sandra passed through the gate that afternoon, smiling politely, as always, Larry stepped forward. "Sandra," he said, voice low but steady, "I know this may sound strange, but I really admire you. You're kind, real, and I like you. I just needed you to know." She paused. The smile faded, not out of anger but confusion. "I'm flattered," she said carefully. "But, I don't know, something about you. It doesn't add up." Larry's heart thudded. "What do you mean?" "You don't walk like a security man. You don't talk like one either," she said. "It's not that I care about that. It's just, it makes me nervous." She hesitated, then added, "I'm not saying no, I'm just unsure." And then she walked away. That night, Larry sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the lines in his journal that refused to make sense. He tapped his pen once, twice, then wrote, "Maybe all women choose safety. Maybe love isn't about who you are, but how well you fit their fears." He closed the notebook and turned off the light. But sleep didn't come. The next day, just after his shift ended, he heard a soft knock on the security post door. It was Sandra. She stood there in her work clothes, her hands clasped in front of her, like she was holding back something bigger than words. "I thought about what you said," she began, "and I owe you honesty." Larry straightened. His heart beat louder. "I don't think you're just a security guard," she said. "In fact, I've suspected for a while. But I didn't ask, because I wanted to see if you would trust me first." Larry blinked. The disguise was still on. But suddenly, he felt exposed. "I don't need to know your background, your salary, or your last name," Sandra said gently. "What I care about is how you make people feel, and how you made me feel." She smiled, soft, real, unafraid. "You respected me." Larry didn't know what to say. For once, the man who had learned to listen was speechless. Outside, the sun dipped below the compound wall, casting long, golden shadows on the concrete. Inside that moment, something else was rising. Hope. By the time the fourth week rolled in, the company was abuzz with something new. His name was Mr. Raymond. Tall, suave, with a sharp Oxford accent and a smile that melted tension in every boardroom he entered, Raymond was introduced as the new corporate liaison from the partner firm overseas. And more importantly, he was single. Jessica noticed him the moment he stepped out of the black SUV. She adjusted her blouse, smoothed her hair, and smiled. At first, it was subtle. Morning greetings, laced with compliments, laughter that came too easily, questions that didn't need answers. Then came the coffee runs, the accidental lunches in the same corner of the cafeteria, and the glances across meeting rooms that lasted just a second too long. Jessica hadn't forgotten Larry, but Raymond was the backup plan, the new lottery ticket, the safety net. And in Jessica's world, one couldn't afford to bet on nobody. Meanwhile, Larry watched from the shadows. Not angry, just amused. Because what Jessica didn't know was that Raymond, charming, foreign, perfectly timed, Raymond was Chief Bernard's nephew, sent, not from abroad, but from the family estate, with one simple mission. Help me see what kind of woman Jessica truly is. Bernard had always trusted his instincts, but in business and family, instinct needed proof. Raymond was that proof. And Jessica? She was making it far too easy. It didn't stop there. Sensing something unspoken between Larry and Sandra, Jessica grew restless. One morning, she approached the janitor who cleaned the East Wing bathrooms and handed him a wad of cash folded inside a biscuit wrapper. "Just keep your eyes open," she said. "Tell me who he talks to, what they say, where they go." The janitor, confused but tempted, agreed. And so it began. Jessica's private surveillance on the very man she believed. Larry found out 2 days later. He had spotted the janitor loitering behind the generator house, holding a phone he never used before. It didn't take much to connect the dots. That night, Larry leaned back on his thin mattress and chuckled to himself. "She thinks she's playing chess," he wrote in his journal. But the board was flipped before the game even began. Jessica believed she was navigating options, securing futures, planting seeds in different soils. But what she didn't know was that she wasn't the only one playing a role. The tension had been building for days, tight like a rope about to snap. But on this afternoon, it finally broke. Sandra was sitting in the courtyard, quietly reading a file under the shade of the old almond tree. It was her moment of peace. Jessica approached, heels clicking on concrete, her designer sunglasses pushed up onto her head like a crown. Her tone was sharp, her arms crossed tight across her chest. "I don't know what game you're playing," she began, not bothering with pleasantries. "But let me give you a piece of advice. Getting friendly with the gate man won't change your destiny." Sandra looked up, calm, unshaken. Jessica continued, "You can smile at him all you like. It won't make you the next Mrs. Bernard." There was a pause, a long one. Then Sandra closed her file gently, stood up, and met Jessica's stare without blinking. "You talk like a person who's threatened," she said softly. "Is it because, deep down, you're afraid I might be the real one?" Jessica's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond. She didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. From a distance, Larry watched the exchange. He was standing just behind the administrative block, out of sight but well within earshot. He saw Jessica's clenched fists, Sandra's steady posture, and the storm that passed through the space between them without a single curse word, but with more sharpness than any blade. Later that evening, Sandra sat alone on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her heart was beating faster than usual, not because of the argument, but because of the realization that had finally reached her. She picked up her phone, scrolled to a contact saved simply as Sir Bernard, and pressed call. When he answered, his voice was warm and curious. But Sandra didn't hesitate. "Sir," she said gently, "I'm grateful for everything, but I'd like to step away from whatever plans you had in mind for me. I've made my own choice." There was silence on the other end. "I've fallen for someone," she continued, "not because of who he is, but because of how he treats people. And as far as I know, he's a security guard." She ended the call before he could reply, because she didn't need permission to follow her heart. The air inside Chief Bernard's Ikoyi estate was heavy with anticipation. The long mahogany table in the center of the sitting room had been polished to a mirror shine. Fresh juice sat in crystal tumblers. Every detail, down to the folded napkins and gold-trimmed plates, spoke of a special occasion. Jessica arrived first. She wore an emerald green dress, fitted and flawless, with earrings that caught every flicker of the chandelier. Her stride was confident, her smile radiant. To her, this was the day destiny would unfold. The day she'd be formally introduced as the future Mrs. Bernard. Sandra came minutes later. She wore a simple cream blouse and a skirt that had clearly been ironed with care. She didn't wear perfume or jewelry, only sincerity. Her presence turned no heads. Then the door opened, and Larry walked in. Today, he wore a tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, and black dress shoes that echoed on the marble floor. His hair was neatly trimmed, his posture unmistakably confident. Jessica froze. Her jaw tightened, her smile dropped. Her breath caught in her throat. Larry didn't pause. He walked past the table, past the silent stairs, and stopped directly in front of her. "You once called me trash," he said quietly, eyes locked on hers. "So tell me, does trash now have the right to ask you to leave?" The room went still. Jessica's lips parted, but no words came out. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to adjust her bracelet, a nervous gesture with no purpose. Chief Bernard said nothing. He didn't need to. His face remained unreadable, but his eyes said everything. Sandra stood, unsure what to do, but when Larry turned to her, everything softened. He walked toward her, slowly, and Sandra, who had been holding back tears from the moment he entered, could no longer stop them. "I never needed your status," she whispered through the tears. "I never cared about your name. I just needed your heart." Larry reached for her hands, held them gently. "And you saw it," he said. "Even when I didn't show you my face." Jessica turned to Chief Bernard, voice shaking. "Sir, I didn't know. I thought he was—" Bernard raised a hand, firm, calm, final. "This wasn't a test for him," he said. "It was a mirror for you." Jessica looked down. Her voice failed her. The diamond-studded shoes on her feet suddenly felt far too loud for a room where truth had already spoken. No one asked her to leave. She simply picked up her purse and walked out on her own, heels tapping an empty rhythm through a house, no longer listening. Back inside, Larry pulled a chair out for Sandra, and as she sat beside him, she realized something. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was better, because it was built on something no money could buy: truth. The sun was beginning to set over the Bernard Group compound. casting golden streaks through the wide glass windows of the conference hall. Staff members had gathered at the company's end-of-quarter celebration, most expecting a speech, a toast, was a moment that would echo in memory long after the chairs were cleared. Chief Bernard stepped up first, as always. He thanked the team, spoke of growth, of resilience, of pride. Then, with a knowing glance toward the back of the room, he nodded. Larry stepped forward, but this time, no one saw a security guard. He didn't walk to the front of the room. He walked toward Sandra. The murmurs began. Sandra, standing near the refreshments table, froze as she saw him coming. She looked around, uncertain if the eyes gathering meant judgment or celebration. Then he stopped in front of her, and slowly, without a word, Larry got down on one knee. A collective hush swept the room. Even the fans above seemed to hold their breath. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. But what he said next wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polished. It was real. "You saw my heart before you ever knew my name," he said, voice steady but full of emotion. "You loved the part of me that others overlook, the part I hid, the part I wasn't sure was enough." He paused. "I've lived with titles, but you gave me something I never had, a sense of being enough, even without them. You didn't fall in love with what I showed the world. You fell in love with what I tried to protect from it." Tears filled Sandra's eyes, and then, with a trembling smile, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." The room erupted. Cheers, applause, stunned gasps from co-workers who had only ever seen her as the quiet one. Chief Bernard smiled, but it was Raymond he turned to. "Well," he said dryly, arms folded, "test complete." Raymond chuckled, nodding. "But I'll admit, Uncle, the results were better than expected." Bernard's expression grew thoughtful. "Still," he added, half to himself, "people's hearts are harder to read than spreadsheets." Larry stood and wrapped Sandra in a quiet embrace, one that said more than words could carry. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not status, not past, not expectation. Just two people. And one truth. That real love doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be seen. Weeks had passed. The office whispers faded. The headlines moved on. But some echoes lingered longer than others. Jessica sat alone on a cracked concrete bench near a roadside market in Yaba. Her once perfect nails chipped, her heels dusty, her makeup smudged by tears she no longer tried to hide. In her lap was a plastic bag filled with hospital leaflets and a worn-out envelope, one she kept reading, even though it said nothing new. She was pregnant. Mr. Raymond had left the country weeks ago. Back to Canada, they said. Back to his real life. A wife, children, a home far from the world where Jessica had built her illusion. She was jobless, reputation in shambles, and no one picking up her calls. The same friends who once sipped wine with her now pretended not to see her messages. A school bus passed by, honking loudly, kicking up red dust. Jessica didn't blink. She whispered to herself, voice barely louder than the wind, "I had every chance." But I chased packaging and ignored the contents. Her reflection in a tinted shop window looked back, older, lonelier, and stripped of every illusion. Meanwhile, not far away, in the quiet back corner of the Bernard compound, two figures strolled slowly down the narrow path behind the administrative building, the place where it all began. Larry and Sandra. He had insisted they take this walk, just once more, before everything became too official, too public, too polished. They walked past the old security quarters, past the generator room, until they reached the bench where Sandra had once left him a meat pie, where he'd once written about invisible men and loud truths. It was still there, a little worn, stuffed. They sat in silence. No fanfare, no speeches, just the sound of birds settling into the trees above, and the warm breeze carrying the scent of fried plantain from a nearby buka. Larry looked at her, not with the gaze of a man who had won, but of someone deeply grateful for what hadn't been lost. Sandra turned slightly, her fingers brushing his. They didn't need words, because what needed to be said had already been spoken, long ago, in kind gestures, in quiet water bottles, in moments when no one was watching. Above them, sunlight filtered through the leaves like golden confetti, falling gently on their shoulders. And in that light, there was no wealth, no disguise, no legacy, just two people who had chosen each other when everything else was still unknown. You can wear rags and still be seen, if your heart is kind. In a world where everyone wants to look important, the ones who treat the unimportant with dignity are the ones who truly matter. People will forget what you wear, what you own, or even what you say, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. Titles fade, money can disappear, but kindness, that's the currency that never loses its value. So remember, be kind when no one is watching. Love without conditions, and never underestimate the power of a humble heart.